the subdivision regulations, specifically, the mere approval of a final plat does not constitute acceptance of the items that are to be dedicated. The subdivision regulations say, you can accept final plat without you can approve final plat without accepting the items for dedication, whether it be streetlights, whether it be sewers, whether it be roads. And so, the final plat was approved in '04 or whatever year it was.
Do you have to note it in that plat that you're not accepting the streets and the lights, or is that just a consensus of?
Well,
I mean, does that
there
have to
must be, the subdivision reg says that such acceptance will require separate formal action by the Board of Aldermen. I know of no formal action by the Board of Aldermen at any time since '04 after approval of final plat accepting the street. We're talking about the street. I have seen nothing that says the street was accepted. The city administrator doesn't have any authority to accept or reject. This Board of Aldermen is who accepts the streets by formal action, that is an ordinance or a resolution. I have seen no ordinance or resolution where the city of Garden City accepted the streets. The mere releasing of the bond or the letter of credit doesn't mean the city accepts it. Analogy, if you're charged with a traffic citation or a criminal charge, you may have to post a bond with the court. Sometimes those bonds are released. The only purpose of the bond is to ensure that the developer is going to complete the project. Just because you release it doesn't relieve the developer of the obligation to do the deed to complete the street per the subdivision standards. And so when you look at the minutes back in '04 when the final plat was approved, the head of planning and zoning recommends approval of the final plat of Brome Hills when all the requirements of the subdivision regs are met. No one has in any way told me that the streets in Brome Hills in any way, shape, or form meet the city standards. So, I know that 60 days ago you all were faced with a difficult situation with a person building a home out there, and you issued the permit and allowed it to go forward to later deal with what's going to happen with the streets when and if the city accepts them. So the city has not accepted it. There's been no formal action by the city accepting it.
And there appears to be an area added to that plat, or whatever you call it, that is really, does not even have specs. The turnaround area is just a circle.
There's certainly some changes. I don't know whether there's an ad, there's changes to it.
Yeah.
I was told that was actually not really supposed to be, that's not really what it's gonna be, because isn't there a second phase, Kyle, that can come off that street?
There's a street
And
light
the only
going
reason
on
you guys
south.
made it so you could park your cars.
Well, we didn't make it,
But Kyle Burton did.
right, but
Yeah, but that's actually supposed to be a through street.
in place of a dead-end street, he just made a little teardrop there. So
Has anybody from the city went out and looked at the street and reported back on Morris and them and gave us specs on it?
Morrison's been out
Well,
there.
Morris has.
And then I know.
I went out with Morris a couple of months ago.
I believe the fire department went out to see if they could turn around a fire truck, and it was impossible.
So what's wrong with the street, do we know?
Well, your subdivision standards, your street standards at the time this subdivision was developed were less stringent than they are today. But it doesn't begin to meet what your standards were in January of '04, much less July of '17, as far as how many inches of rock base and how many inches of rough asphalt and how many inches of finish asphalt you must have. This was approved without curbs and gutters. There was a variance issued by the city back in '03 and '04 when this subdivision was being planned.
I brought that
To-
variance, for the simple fact was
Okay,
those
okay, we're not
3
gonna
acre
have, we're not
tracts.
gonna have curbs and gutters.
Right.
We're gonna, but we're still gonna meet street standards. We're gonna have so many inches of base and so many
And we
inches
can
of
go back
asphalt.
to the 2004.
Yes, I believe that, but there isn't that much difference. But what's out there now doesn't begin to meet what your standard was
When it was put in.
in '03. You all amended the subdivision regs as far as how much asphalt and rock is necessary in a small way shortly after this, in '04.
Okay, so we need to get you to a position where we can okay the streets. So who do we talk to? Do we have Morris go out and look and give us an idea of where
Yeah.
the streets need to be? I mean, who can make that
Well, I don't
call?
know, the developer can, you know, the question is, there's nothing like, what I understand, a 6-inch base and a 4 inches, 6 inches worth of asphalt there. How is that ever gonna be accomplished without the developer doing so? Is there some debate as to whether this street in any way meets the subdivision standards?
No, I'm just saying, if
Okay.
Morris went out and said, this is
Well,
what has to be
Morris,
done.
I guess he could take a core cut, you know, and say, there appears to be 2 inches of base and there appears to be an old 2 inches worth of asphalt and the street's growing weeds now and it looks like it's about up to chip and seal standards. And so, I guess if you feel that to be necessary,
I don't know, I'm just trying to figure out how we can make our next.
unless the developer, you know, wants to tell us what's out there. You know, the developer can tell us, he's here, he
No, he's not. He's
You're
long
what?
gone. He's long gone.
Yeah.
He's in Colorado.
Well, I'm sorry, what are you appearing for?
They bought the
We're the
property
owner.
after, the
Well,
developer
no,
sold the property.
I'm sorry, who are you, sir?
Kyle McCullough.
And you're the son of Jerry McCullough, who would be the owner,
Our donor, yeah.
okay? You know, you can either tell us what's there, or somebody like Morris can go out and do a core sample and submit a report to you all and say, I find that from the 3 core samples I had, there's so many inches of rock and there's so many inches of asphalt.
That's kind of where I want to get, is where Mr. McCullough can begin, you know, where we can begin the process of getting the street ready to be accepted. But it has to be to the 2004 standard at least.
That's where we changed the streets to what, 24 feet wide with a base of 22 feet of asphalt in width. You went to what, I think we changed it to 4.5 inches, but at one time, it was a 6 inches of base asphalt. But I think you talked about '04, I think they backed that down to 4.5 inches. I'd have to look, but I believe what I read today was correct.
Knowing what's there is the first thing you gotta do, so.
Yeah,
All right,
I
I mean,
agree.
we need to take a step and get this
Right.
thing going, so I guess we just need to figure out
Well,
maybe,
normally the developer presents you all with information, either through an engineer or a contractor or something, and says, here's what we have out here. And so I'm asking that this street be accepted. And we would normally have someone like Morris or our outside engineer say, look at this street and is it in fact up to standards? So
if we're gonna adopt something, we need to have some professional people to say, what you're adopting is worth taking ownership.
Right, I want it to be right, I want it to be.
Yeah,
right.
we don't want to
Well,
inherit something.
and part of the problem is it's set for 13 years.
Well, to be honest, our problem is we can't redo the street, we don't have the money, you know, so.
No, we don't have the money in our budget to redo
Yeah.
the street, no. That, even, let's say even if the street was up to par, I don't have a budget to do any improvements on it. It's not there. We're barely gonna have improvements for the streets we need.
I'm not sure what's on the agenda tonight for discussion. Is
Well-
two things, streetlights and
Yeah,
status of acceptance of streets, or what?
just that information regarding.
Since the
street.
developer is not here asking questions or presenting something, I guess I have a hard time addressing it.
Kyle, do you have any more prospects of people going out there?
Possibly.
Are we 50, or 60, or 90, or 1 or 2 or 10, or
80-20 maybe.
any more than
Like
1 or 2?
Pardon?
Any more than 1 or 2?
Not at this point.
Not at this point.
They're just inquiring about it.
So I guess you need to let us know how the streets are out there. I think that's probably our next step, right?
Well, the normal process would be the developer asks the city to accept the streets, and they would either have an engineering report or some sort of a report that says, we have built this street and it's got X inches of rock and it's got, compacted to there's compaction requirements, and, there may be what your base rock is and a finished rock, and then rough asphalt and finished asphalt.
See, we can't answer
Here's
any of
what's
that.
there.
Does Kyle have any records of that when he put that in? I mean, he should have,
He should,
but does he?
but all we've got is that drawing that you guys have got of that street. We bought it on good faith that that street was, and it was in our contract, the street would be accepted by the city before the closing. So Mr. Larkham and whoever was on the council at that time, before we closed on that, our understanding was the street was accepted. We bought an as-is subdivision that was supposed to be ready to build on.
Well, it's not the city's position to exercise the due diligence necessary to see whether the contract between McCullough and Burton was fulfilled. I mean,
No, I'm
You
just,
know, it's
I'm
either
just
buyer
telling you what our,
beware.
I'm not,
yeah,
I can't say one way or the other, I'm just telling you what the conditions were of when we
Right.
purchased that.
Well, I think the first thing we have to do is figure out what shape the street's in and where we go from there. You know, what do you have to do, what do we do? Because I don't wanna hold you guys up, that's not the point. But, we can't fix the street because we don't have the money.
We're not asking you guys to
I
come out and fix the street.
I know. And so, we don't wanna accept something that we can't, that we'd be liable for really right at this point. But I wanna see you all be able to
We
build
would just
out
like to
there.
come to an agreement with the city, I mean, we're willing to help, we know my personal opinion, the street wasn't installed properly.
Right.
It is what it is, I can't do anything about that.
Monster.
We're willing to help with maintenance
Yeah.
and, whatever.
I guess we just need to figure out maybe if Morris could meet with you and figure out where we go, what do you have to do to,
I really don't think the city
oh, I see what you're saying.
has the burden to really initiate this and do something. It's up to the developer to come to the city and say, look, I have a city with the following, has been constructed with the following base and asphalt.
Mhm.
And does that meet city standards? No.
And
So, I guess there's the potential that a developer could ask for a variance. But that's a whole nother issue that you all would need to consider, whether you accept a street that is substandard and has been for 13 years, and whether you would accept it into the city under some variance in some way. And I'm not suggesting you do that, but that's,
Right, an option.
In the
That's an
past,
option.
the discussion, to my recollection, is it was to be accepted just as a private driveway, street, whatever you wanna call it, where they could pursue building on it without any recognition from the city or ownership by the city. It would be strictly the developer owning that thing. I mean, I think that was what I read or understood.
well, when you all issued the permit 60 days ago, it was done based upon resolving at a later date the street issue, and there was no acceptance whatsoever at that time. So, right now, it's a private street.
And
out there.
is that okay? I mean, is that,
Well, can you all have private streets in the city of Garden City? I'd say that's open for debate, but, you're supposed to have to, in order for a builder to build and develop a subdivision, they're supposed to do it according to your subdivision regulations. What has been constructed in Brome Hills is not according to your subdivision regulations. There was a variance granted so that there were not curbs and gutters. But there has been no variance whatsoever granted that says you can have a substandard street. And so you all have to, in order to grant a variance, you'd have to deal with issues. Are we going to accept, what are we gonna do about maintenance? How are we ever gonna maintain what is, I'm not an engineer, chip and seal road? You know, that's sort of what's out there. So, I think the city, it's incumbent on the developer to come to the city and say, here's what we have out there, and whether they ask for acceptance.
Where's the as-built for that street, for that subdivision?
Well, I don't think there are any, because they were never accepted by the city.
No, where is the as-built for anything in that subdivision? I mean.
There are none. That's part of the problem.
Our city subdivisions that we put in, you guys have got an as-built. You had a preliminary, then you had an accepted plat, and then you had an as-built.
No, I don't think there's ever been anything like that presented to the city. There's never been any as-built because it was never completed.
I'm not talking about that one, I'm talking about our other subdivisions, we always had to file an as-built.
I don't have any
If this
knowledge.
subdivision was put up in the city limits, then shouldn't there be an as-built somewhere?
We don't have one that I know of.
That should tell us what he put in there when he built that
As
street.
far as I'd have to.
See, that's the
research
problem, I don't
more
think
about
nothing's
it.
ever been turned in from it. I don't think we have an engineer's report, we don't have a compaction report. That's why I was wanting to see if Kyle, maybe somewhere, I mean, let's face it, this subdivision's set too damn long. Excuse me. I'll be in trouble.
yes, you are.
Okay.
I'm telling you.
I should have shut up a long time ago. So, if you can talk with Mr. Burton and he thinks he has some kind of documentation, I would personally like to see it.
See what we can do.
Tom?
I was actually here in the meeting when it was discussed. And Dave Martin was driving out there and said, oh my gosh, they're blacktopping the gravel road out there.
This
And Kyle-
Kyle Burton.
Right, and Kyle stood right in here and said, well, it's not a street, I'm merely paving that because we have this new paving equipment. So I'm paving it so people can go out and see the lots. That's where that was left in the city council meeting. Was that this isn't a road. I've got
So you're telling us
blacktop,
that
we've got the new
Kyle
blacktop.
Burton used his asphalt
He put it
machine,
in.
put it in,
Yes.
it wasn't put in by a contractor. I
No,
mean,
no.
He's the
Kyle
builder.
Burton put it in.
So So
And when it was brought up in the city council meeting,
compaction base.
and I think you were on the city council at that time. You may not have been, but I think you might have been.
was, because I gave you the very,
Kyle
well, I
said-
don't know.
and
When did he
Kyle
put
s-
the street in?
It was close to that, frankly.
Two
Yeah, I was
thousand
probably on
four-ish, I think, 2003, 2004, right in there. And the conversation in the city
Yes,
council
13
meeting,
years
because I was
ago.
sitting right back here, the conversation in that city council meeting was the fact that, look, he says, no, I'm just putting it in so people have access to come in and see the lights. And I think if you ask him, I think that's exactly what he told you to do. Well, maybe not now, but that was a conversation, because I was sitting right in the room, sitting right here, so.
Thank you very much.
Shed some light. We can't take ownership of something that, I mean, I'd like to do something nice for everybody, but man alive, we paid for mistakes that's unbelievable.
Well, I guess you're gonna have to tell us what you have, and we tell you what you need, and we go from there. I'm sorry, but I appreciate you coming in.
None of it's personal.
I know it isn't, I know. Do you have any other questions, Mr. McCullough?
No.
Okay. Any other discussion? No? Okay, our next item of business, Kathy Bean of the Garden City Fall Festival Committee requests permission for a street closing to allow for vendor booths during the Fall Festival. Okay.
I'm Kathy.
Okay.
This is all new. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm
Tell us what you want.
I just want the approval of being able to have our vendor spot as we did in the past last year between 4th and 5th Street on Main Street. I'm just here for the vendors part. I'm not here for anything else.
Okay, you wanna
I'm
close the
taking
street?
care of my end.
Yeah, for the vendor booths.
Yeah, right,
Okay.
right.
Between